The air in the cramped cockpit of the He-162 was thin, cold, and smelled faintly of wood glue and aviation fuel. Gefreiter Eric, barely 18, shivered, not from the chill, but from the raw, exposed vulnerability of his position. Above him, the single BMW 03 jet engine screamed its high-pitched, frantic song, a constant vibrating presence that rattled his teeth and blurred his vision. This was the Volksjager, the people's fighter, a desperate marvel of late-war German engineering, built from wood, glue, and a prayer. For Erich, it was both a symbol of hope and a coffin waiting to happen. It was early 1945, and the skies over Germany were a swirling maelstrom of Allied bombers and their fighter escorts. Erich's mission was simple: intercept and destroy. But his aircraft, the He-162, was anything but simple. Designed and built in a frantic 3 months, it was a testament to speed and improvisation. The fuselage was mostly duralumin, but the wings and tail were constructed from plywood, held together by a special acid-based glue. He remembered the engineers, their faces gaunt from lack of sleep, explaining the intricacies of the design. They spoke of its incredible speed, its agility. They didn't speak of the glue. His hands, still bearing the faint calluses from his days as a glider pilot, gripped the control stick. The He-162 was light, almost too light, responding to his slightest touch with an eagerness that was both exhilarating and terrifying. He could feel every gust of wind, every tremor of the engine directly through the airframe. It was like flying a kite, a very fast, very deadly kite. The canopy, a thin bubble of plexiglass, offered a panoramic view of the vast, empty sky, but also a stark reminder of the fragile barrier between him and the freezing, unforgiving atmosphere. The fuel gauges flickered ominously. The He-162 was a thirsty beast, its jet engine guzzling precious J2 fuel at an alarming rate. He had enough for perhaps 20 minutes of combat, 30 if he conserved. The math of flight was a brutal equation. Speed equaled fuel, and fuel equaled life. Every maneuver, every burst of acceleration, chipped away at his remaining time in the sky. He was a predator with a rapidly expiring clock, hunting prey that seemed to have an endless supply of time and resources. Suddenly, the radio crackled. Bandit, 12 o'clock high, P-51s. The voice of his flight leader, Oberleutnant Schmidt, was calm, but Eric could hear the underlying tension. P-51 Mustangs. The bane of the Luftwaffe. Fast, agile, and heavily armed. He pushed the throttle forward, the jet engine screaming in protest, pushing him back into his seat. The He-162 surged forward, a wooden arrow launched into the heart of the storm. This was it. The moment of truth. The moment where the desperate gamble of the Volksjager would be tested against the might of the Allied Air Force. He pulled back on the stick, the He-162 climbing steeply, its lightweight construction allowing for an impressive rate of ascent. He saw them now, glinting silver in the weak winter sun, a formation of 4 Mustangs, their long noses pointing aggressively towards him. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the roar of the engine. He was alone, a single fragile dart against a squadron of steel predators. The odds were impossible, but despair was a luxury he couldn't afford. He was a pilot, and his duty was to fight. As he closed the distance, a new, more insidious fear began to creep in. A faint, acrid smell, like vinegar, began to permeate the cockpit. The glue. The special acid-based glue that held the plywood wings together. He remembered the whispered warnings from the ground crew, the stories of early prototypes shedding their wings in midair. The T-Stoff fuel, highly corrosive, was known to seep into the airframe, slowly dissolving the very bonds that kept the plane intact. He glanced at his wings, the wooden surfaces vibrating violently under the strain of high-speed flight. Was it his imagination, or were there tiny hairline cracks appearing near the root? The thought was paralyzing. He was flying a plane that was literally dissolving around him. The enemy wasn't just the P-51s, it was his own aircraft, a wooden wonder turning into a death trap. He tried to push the thought away, to focus on the fight, but the smell grew stronger, a constant nauseating reminder of his impending doom. The roar of the engine, once a comforting sound of power, now seemed like the frantic cries of a dying beast, tearing itself apart from within. He lined up his shot, the Mustang filling his sights. He squeezed the trigger, the twin 20mm cannons spitting fire, their recoil shaking the lightweight airframe. Tracers arced through the sky, finding their mark. One of the Mustangs lurched, smoke trailing from its engine, and began to spiral downwards. A small victory, a momentary reprieve. But the acrid smell intensified, and he could feel a subtle shift in the controls, a slight looseness in the stick that hadn't been there before. The glue was failing. He was losing his wings. Panic threatened to overwhelm him. He was caught between two impossible choices: continue the fight and risk his plane disintegrating around him, or break off and try to land a crippled aircraft, a target for every enemy fighter in the sky. He looked at the remaining Mustangs now closing in, their machine guns flashing. There was no escape. He was trapped in a wooden coffin, dissolving in mid-air, a victim of his own desperate technology. The roar of the engine, the smell of the glue, the flashing guns, all merged into a single, terrifying symphony of destruction. This wasn't a fight for victory. It was a fight for a few more seconds of life, a desperate struggle against the inevitable. He pushed the stick forward, diving steeply, trying to shake off his pursuers. The G-forces pressed him into his seat, and for a moment, the smell of the glue seemed to lessen, replaced by the rush of air. But it was a temporary reprieve. He could feel the airframe groaning, protesting against the strain. The wings, his beautiful, fragile wooden wings, were flexing more than they should, a terrifying elasticity that spoke of imminent failure. He imagined the splinters, the sudden, catastrophic tearing of wood and fabric, the plunge into the freezing void. The thought was colder than the air outside, a chilling premonition of his final moments. He pulled up sharply, trying a desperate maneuver, a last-ditch effort to gain an advantage. The He-162 responded sluggishly, its agility compromised by the weakening airframe. Another Mustang flashed past, its bullets stitching a line across his tail. He heard the sickening thwack of rounds hitting wood, and a new, more urgent warning light flashed on his instrument panel. Control surfaces damaged. He was losing control. The plane was dying around him, piece by agonizing piece. His vision blurred, not from G-forces, but from the fumes. The cockpit was filling with the acrid, vinegary smell, burning his eyes and throat. He coughed, a dry, hacking sound that was lost in the roar of the engine. He knew what was happening. The T-Stoff, the highly corrosive fuel, was not just seeping into the glue. It was filling the air, a toxic gas slowly poisoning him. He was being consumed from within by his own machine, a silent, invisible enemy more deadly than any bullet. He looked down through the thin plexiglass canopy at the patchwork of fields and forests below. It was a beautiful world, a world he was rapidly leaving behind. He thought of his family, his small village, the simple life he had known before the war. It all seemed so distant, so unreal, a fading dream against the harsh reality of his wooden coffin. He was a sacrifice, a desperate offering in a war that had already devoured millions. The Volksjager, the people's fighter, was consuming its people, one young pilot at a time. The engine sputtered, a sudden terrifying cough that sent a jolt of fear through him. Fuel starvation. He had pushed it too hard, too long. The roar began to fade, replaced by a high-pitched whine, then a series of metallic clanks and groans. The jet engine, his only source of power, was dying. He was gliding now, a heavy, wooden glider plummeting towards the earth. The silence, after the deafening roar, was almost more terrifying, a sudden, stark realization of his helplessness. He tried to restart the engine, frantically flipping switches, pushing buttons, but it was useless. The engine was dead. He was alone, miles above the ground, in a plane that was literally falling apart. He looked at his hands, still gripping the control stick, but they felt alien, detached. He was no longer flying. He was merely falling, a passenger on his own funeral pyre. The acrid smell of glue and fuel, the cold air rushing past the shattered canopy, the silent, terrifying descent. This was his end. The wooden wonder had become his wooden grave, a testament to a desperate war that had consumed everything, even its own last fragile hopes. He closed his eyes, accepting his fate. The ground rushed up to meet him, a blur of green and brown. He felt the final violent jolt, a crushing impact that extinguished all thought, all fear, all sensation. The He-162, the people's fighter, disintegrated into a shower of splinters and twisted metal, a brief fiery epitaph in the dying days of the war. Irish, the young pilot, was gone, consumed by the wooden wonder, a silent ghost in the endless sky. The desperate gamble had failed, and the glue had finally given way.